This week on Liminal Outdoors Podcast, all things lake trout. I'm going to go over 3 quick stories of 3 giant lake trout that we caught, all using different styles to help you learn and catch your best lake trout ever so that you can maybe skip some of the frustration that I had trying to catch those big fish. Let's dive in. It's these quiet moments, the liminal moment, literally the space between. Not fully light, not fully dark, but building something new. It's like a metaphor for our life. Who are you building? Who are you becoming? What skill do you want to learn? What adventure do you want to go on? You build them in these small, incremental, liminal moments, one piece at a time, stacked on top of each other. Let's do it together. Let's build it right now at Liminal Outdoors. Well, it's April, and it snowed last night. Gotta love Colorado. Springtime, the lakes are open, the boat's out, kind of got lake trout on the brain. So this week I thought, let's go through 3 different examples of lake trout that we've caught that kind of try to help shorten your learning curve, maybe get you on a big fish. Learning to catch those lake trout was an incredibly frustrating and long endeavor for me and my buddy Ben. Really started in college. We went to college in a town in Colorado called Gunnison. It's by a lake called Blue Mesa, Colorado's biggest lake or reservoir, full lake trout. That's kind of the place for lake trout in Colorado. And so we spent a lot of time in college trying to catch those things. And we spent a lot of days on the water, not catching diddly squat. So probably the most common and maybe the funnest way to catch those fish is to vertically jig. And that's what we tried all through college. We spent a lot of days vertically jigging. And here's a little secret I'll let you in right now. What we learned later is our jig heads were way too heavy. You think big fish, you're thinking big giant tubes. We're fishing 6, 8, 9-inch Toro tubes. So you think you got to have a big old huge weight in that thing. And what really happens when you have that big weight in that tube jig is a lake trout bite, even a 20, 30, 40 pound fish, is a very light, very subtle bite. And so you put a big 2, 3, 4 ounce head in one of those tube jigs, you can't feel it. You can't feel diddly squat. And so what we learned after many, many days of trial and error is that you got to actually go with the lightest tube jig head weight that'll allow you to keep that jig on the bottom. And so in like 20, 30 feet of water, I'm very often running like a 1/2 ounce tube jig head. And one of my favorite jigging stories. So I used to guide on a different lake not too far away. And what I really enjoyed about that lake is very often the smaller fish and the big fish were found in the same spot. So a lot of times if you're catching what they call pups, small lake trout, 12, 14, 18, 20-inch fish, your bigger fish are going to be completely different water. And what makes that hard as a guide is when people want to go catch a big lake trout, that you might be trophy hunting. You might spend all day trying to catch 1 or 2 fish. And as much as people say that they're fine doing that, by the time you get onto the hour 3 of not catching fish, people start getting anxious. They want to catch something. And so you move out, catch some smaller fish just to have a little action. But then in doing so, you've moved yourself away from the trophy fish. And so it was tough balancing that dynamic. What I loved about this other lake, especially early spring when the water's cold, the thing about fishing lake trout early spring is they come up shallow. They really like that cold water. And so they become more accessible right at ice out early spring. I always thought 48 to 52 degrees was perfect water temperature. And we catch them shallow. I've caught them as shallow as 5, 6, 8, 10 feet. I would say 20 to 40 is probably more common that time of year. But this other lake, just a whole different ecosystem. It's a high mountain lake, not as much space for the fish to roam. And very often we found the pups and the big fish in the same spot, which made it wonderful for a guide. And even when he took family and stuff, because we could catch some smaller fish while also trophy hunting, which made my life so much easier. And what we would do on that lake is I kind of narrowed in or settled on a 6-inch tube jig. If I had some kids in the boat that were getting bored and wanted to just catch some fish, we would size that down to like a 4. You had someone who was dead set on a super big fish and all they wanted was a trophy, I'd go ahead and size it up to a Toro tube like an 8. That 6-inch was just kind of that middle ground where we very often could catch quite a few smaller mid-sized fish while still having an opportunity at a big fish. And that's exactly what happened on the day that I'm thinking of. I had 2 brothers in my boat. They had actually booked the boat for 2 days. And the one brother, like fishaholic, dead set on fishing, wanted nothing more than to catch a big lake trout. The other brother, he took a weekend off of work. And like, not judging at all. They were great guys. They had a ton of fun. But the one brother was in the back of the boat and I was jigging, helping him a little bit. Occasionally I'd throw a rod in when it was a smaller group or just trying to show technique or whatever. And the one brother and I are in the back of the boat just ripping lips. I think that the one brother probably caught, I don't know, he probably caught 50 fish that day. The other brother is sitting in the front of the boat, just splayed out, kind of his rod off the side of the boat, just soaking up the sun, taking a break. And wouldn't you know it, about 2 o'clock on the second day, the brother that is on vacation, all of a sudden, hey, I got one. He had one, all right. I think that fish ended up going 36 pounds. What that illustrates is I always equated lake trout fishing kind of to elk hunting. It's like every bull elk that you get to whistle, every bull elk that you're trying to call in has a different sound that he really responds to. Maybe that day he's fired up on a cow call, or he really likes the chuckle, or maybe the chuckle and a bugle shuts him up. You're trying to find the call that turns that bull on. Lake trout's the same way. You've got to find not only the color and the size of the jig, but you've also got to find the motion that turns that fish on. So sometimes we're pounding the bottom of the lake and you've got to keep tension on your line the whole time. You want to be able to feel that jig, because what happens with those lake trout is they have to tip up to eat off the bottom. And so they'll pick your jig up. And that's what makes the bite so light, is they actually tip up and take your jig towards you. So it's an incredibly light bite. Well, they like to pick things off the bottom. So you want to constantly pound that jig on the bottom. And I always used to think of a song, like a beat, try to keep that beat in your mind. And it's like, boom, 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 boom. And you're just pounding on the bottom of that lake, trying to raise a little dust, trying to raise awareness. And what I've also found is once in a while, you get that jig in motion and then you get a fish that's interested, leave it sit on the bottom for a second and then pick it up, and he'll hit it as soon as you pick it up. So you leave it sit, you're pounding, boom, 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 leave it sit, pick it up, bam. But when you pick it up, every time you're like setting it on the bottom, pick up, feel for a bite. Set it on the bottom, pick it up, feel for a bite. And you're keeping that constant tension with that jig so you can feel that really, really light bite. And if that's not working, sometimes give it a big rip, jerk it way up in the air, and you can almost play keep away from them. I found that the keep away method works a little better on the smaller fish. Like they swim up to it and you kind of pull it away, and they swim up to it and you kind of pull it away. On that particular day, what we found with the bigger fish is they wanted a very, very slow approach. I mean, it was literally like set it on the bottom, pick it off. Set it on the bottom, pick it off. And I think what happened was the brother in the back of the boat that was catching all the fish, it's just hard to stay patient for that long period of time, right? Like you're wanting to like really catch a fish. And the brother in the front of the boat, like he was just kind of lazing and just holding that rod there. And he was leaving it on the bottom for a really long time. And then he'd kind of pick it up, check it. And that fish wanted the slow approach. So it's important to mix up that approach. The other really important thing that helped us on jigging a lot was the type of line. We started fishing braided line, and there's no stretch on braid, so that it's really sensitive. You can really detect those light bites. A lot of times a lake trout bite on a jig just means all of the weight of the jig disappears. They just pick it up, and all of a sudden your jig just feels weightless, like you can't find the bottom. Set the hook. Hook sets are free. I used to tell my people all the time, hook sets are free. If you get that feeling of like no jig being attached, set it. But that braid really, really helps. And then we put like a 6 or an 8 foot, like 12-pound fluorocarbon leader on the end of it. So you still have the clear attributes, right down close to your jig, but then you had the sensitivity of the braid the rest of the way through. And that really helped our success jigging for lake trout, was the braid and then the lighter jig heads so that you could feel. But interestingly enough, the very first truly like big lake trout I ever caught was on a whole sucker. And it's the whole sucker fishing. It's a controversial topic. Kind of think about like fly fishermen and bait fishermen. They don't always get along. And it's kind of the same with your true lake trout fishermen and your guys that fish bait. And part of the reason why, and I have come to learn, when you're fishing those whole suckers with big treble hooks, it can really damage the fish. There's a saying when you're fishing whole suckers that you got to let them run until it stops, and then they start running again, and that's when you set the hook. Well, if you do that, you're essentially letting that fish swallow that thing, and then you're going to put a big treble hook down in its gut. And if you fish that way, you really have pretty much killed that fish. If you set the hook quickly when you first get the bite, and I actually started using circle hooks, which helped a lot. And a circle hook, you actually don't set the hook. You just flip the bail and just let it tighten down on its own. I remember very distinctly in college fishing days upon days upon days. Nothing, not a bite. And the early springtime in the mountains can be brutally hot, fry you, sunburn, and the very next minute it can be freezing cold and snowing and windy. And we went through all of the weather, fishing every different type of weather, watching people catch fish. And I remember very clearly, there was a morning, Ben and I were out there fishing. The lake was dead calm, but it must have snowed or rained the night before because it was super foggy. It was just, I don't know, it was just like from a movie. The lake, it was just dead flat. And then you've got the clouds kind of hiding the mountains. You can't even really see the ends of the lake. And we're out there with our old, 3-ounce tube jigs, jigging away, trying to catch a fish. And there's this boat not too far away, 2 older gentlemen, and it's anchored. They literally have a rope and an anchor anchored in the lake. And they are just catching fish after fish. And it's that dead calm morning, sound travels super far, and we can just hear them laughing and joking and having the greatest time. And we're getting frustrated because here we are, we've been on the lake 30 days, we haven't got a single bite, and those guys are out there just catching the snot out of them. And so finally, I think Ben worked up enough nerve. He's like, we're gonna go figure this out. So we went over and asked them. We were polite. We pulled in super slow. Hey, do you mind if we chat? And they're like, no, come on over. And we're finally like, what's the deal? We're out here getting our butts kicked. And they were using whole suckers. And the guy showed us how they rigged them. They rigged them with 2 treble hooks, one front and back, which is not how I rigged them. Well, I don't really fish with suckers anymore. But as we learned, as we progressed, we started rigging them in a way that was more friendly to the fish. But in that moment, in that day, we're like, we've got the secret, So we ran to town, bought some suckers from the local bait shop, and the next morning we were back out there. And how we rigged them was we put a big treble hook right in the nose and a big treble hook right behind the dorsal fin. And you anchor your boat, get your boat as dead still as you can. We actually ended up for a time using 2 anchors. We'd put one off the front, one off the back, and try to hold that boat just dead still. You hook that thing out there, and then you leave the bail open. So whether we were fishing with open spinning rods a lot, so you just open the bail. But if you have a big bait caster, you just flip that switch back and leave it open. You could even leave the clicker on if you want. That morning, I think we'd brought my brother-in-law and Ben's brother. There was 4 of us on the boat. So we've all got these suckers hooked out. And that day was brutal hot. One of those fry you sunburn days. And we've been out there, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours. We got up early, hit the marina when it opened, got out on the lake. And it was mid-morning, and we're literally all kind of snoozing in the boat. We're kind of taking naps. And I remember me and my brother-in-law were in the front of the boat. We're laying there. My rod loses like 5 wraps of line, like, brrr. And we kind of look at each other like, did you see that? Yeah, I saw that. And we're watching it and we're watching it. And hey, Ben, I think something's happening. And we're trying to decide what to do. And then all of a sudden it loses like 10 more wraps. Like, brrr. Nobody else's pole's losing wraps. The boat's not moving. Something's going on. I'm going to set the hook. I'm going to try it. So I flip the bail, reel down, and voop, and game on, and then it was just like mass chaos because after 3 months or 2 months or whatever of trying for a couple of springs in a row, we finally have one of these fish on, and so we're scrambling around the boat, running, pulling in anchors, reeling in rods, getting the net out. I think we got him all twisted up in the net, trying to net him, and it ended up being a decent fish. I think he was 16 or 18 pounds or something. We thought we'd caught the world record. We finally got one. That just kind of, honestly, that fish, that moment kind of set into motion my whole lake trout fishing career. We ended up fishing suckers for a couple of years, caught a lot of fish that way, learned a lot about what did and didn't damage the fish. Those big lake trout are old, and we were naive. We were learning. It's a very effective way to fish. I would just caution, again, that you can hurt the fish that way. What we finally ended up doing, we finally learned it towards the end of our sucker fishing days, was we ended up using circle hooks. We do a circle hook right through the nose and a circle hook again right through the dorsal fin, huck it out, leave that bail open. And when it very first starts running, we wouldn't let them run. We'd flip the bail right away. And with the circle hook, you don't set it, you just hold the rod and let it tighten down on itself. And the way those circle hooks are made, it's got that bent tip and it's made to kind of catch. And then as you pull, it pulls through. As a matter of fact, if you set the hook with the circle hook, you're more apt to lose the fish. Now, by flipping the bail immediately on the run, we did hook less fish, but I know that we weren't killing fish. Again, no judgment. There's size limits and laws and regs out there for a reason. As long as you're legal, you get no judgment from me. I can tell you from the lake trout community, there will be judgment, but I'm not that guy. I'm also the guy that if you want to go out deer hunting and you want to shoot the first forky that you see because it makes you excited, I'm going to be as pumped for you as if it was a 180-inch deer. If you want to go chase that 180-inch deer and go for 10 days and never pull the trigger, I'm right there too. It's very much the same with lake trout fishing. And it's the same when I was guiding. If you took your family and you wanted to catch a bunch of fish, we'd probably troll or jig little tube jigs and maybe have a chance at catching a big fish. If you wanted to do nothing but hunt for that big fish, well, we'd go hunt for that big fish. And I was happy either way. To this day, I'm still happy. I took my boys lake trout fishing a couple of weeks ago. And I don't know, we fished around for a couple hours. It was pretty tough. They got bored. We went and casted for browns, which casting for browns this time of year is pretty easy. We ended up doing that the whole rest of the day. I didn't care. It was fun. We had a ball. As my lake trouting career progressed and we started learning more and different ways to fish, we ended up doing a lot of trolling for them. Your typical crankbaits, stick baits, they all work. We ended up catching a lot of fish on spoons. But I tell you, the real trick to catching fish trolling for us was a couple of things: downriggers and planer boards. Those ended up being my two best tools. The downriggers I really liked because you could obviously get the lure down close to the bottom, especially as the fish moved out deeper. When you started getting 30, 40, 50, 60 feet as the fish were moving, you could chase them down with those downriggers. We caught a lot of fish very shallow on planer boards. And I think the reason it worked is those fish that were shallow in that early spring time of year were active. There may not have been a ton of fish shallow. There was actually probably more fish in that 30, 40, 50 feet of water. But the fish that were up shallow in that 8, 10, 15 feet of water, they were actively hunting, which made them prime suspects for fishing. What I finally ended up doing, we finally ended up dialing in, is we have these big swim baits, like big 10, 12-inch, hard-sided, triple-jointed swim baits. And I would run them off of lead core. So we would run our 30 feet of leader. And then on lead core, every 30 feet's a different color. And for every color, you gain depth. What we would end up doing is, for the most part, we'd let out all of the leader and the first color, snap on that planer board, and then run that board away from the boat. Because when you're fishing that shallow, your boat has a tendency to scare those fish. And I tell you, when you're trolling, one of the most important things is your speed. Lake trout like a slow troll. Another way to fish for them is to fish with big flatfish, and you can fish those things very, very slow. Just let out a ton of line so that they're back there behind the boat and they're hitting the bottom. They're raising dust every time they dig into the bottom. You lose some lures that way, but it's a very effective way to fish for them. Literally put the lure on the side of your boat and watch it go in different speeds and watch the action of that lure. And you want to go as slow as you can while still getting maximum action out of that lure. And on those big swim baits, you would see if you'd go like 0.8, 1, 1.2, those lures would barely move. And that 0.8 to 1.2, that was the speed that I liked for like big spoons and flatfish. That was the speed that would give them action, but it was too slow for those swim baits. And I think we ended up dialing in about 1.5 to 1.7, if memory jogs, is where we got that full action out of those swim baits. So we'd let out all the leader, that first color of lead core, snap on that planer board, run it out away from the boat about twice the width of the boat away, and then just troll those shallows about 1.6 miles an hour. And the day I remember particularly, I had a break between trips and my dad came up and I took my dad fishing. And we were doing exactly that. It was a big old rainbow trout colored swim bait. And it was a dynamic lure, if I recall. I'm sure it was. It was a dynamic lure swim bait. And we were fishing in about 18 feet of water. There's this little cove. We were always looking for big sandy flats with drop offs on the edge. The fish would hide on those edges and they would come up on the flats to hunt. And so this flat, little tiny flat right behind an island, it's just a little cove. It's not a very big spot. And we'd literally just troll circles in that little cove. Basically, the circle was about the size that you could troll in a boat without having to reel in those planer boards. Like, to give you an idea of how big that little chunk of ground was. It wasn't very big. It was just big enough to keep the boat turning and not have to reel in those lures. And as we were coming around the backside corner, coming out of that little cove, the inside rod, which the inside rod would have slowed down when you're making a corner. Keep in mind, your inside rod slows, your outside rod speeds up. So your outside rod comes up a little bit, your inside rod comes down a little bit, and the speed changes. So if you're consistently getting bites on that inside or that outside rod, it's a good indicator of whether you maybe need to speed up or slow down. So keep that in the back of your mind. But we were coming around the corner and that inside rod got stuck. I mean, it was a fish. But my dad picked up the rod and he's pulling on it and he's like, we hung the bottom. Which lake trout fishing, we hang the bottom quite often. We're trying to get that lure down close to the bottom. It's part of the gig, right? And so dad picks up the rod and he's like jerking it, like trying to get it off the bottom. And I can see the planer board is moving. Like, I'm like, Dad, we're not hung on the bottom. Stop. And he's trying to like pop it off the bottom. And I'm like, Dad, stop. That's a fish. And he's like, no, it's not. It's stuck on the bottom. And pretty soon that planer board goes zzz, starts ripping line out of the reel. And then game on, right? That fish ended up, I don't know how long we fought it, 8 or 10 minutes probably. I used to say it seemed like, and it's not a hard and fast rule, but it seemed like about 30 seconds to a minute per pound. So like a 30-pound lake trout, very often it take us 15 minutes to catch. That was pretty common. Of course, depending on depth and weather and all those things. But we fought that fish for a while, finally netted it. And I forget what that fish ended up being. I think he was close to 40 inches. It was kind of a skinnier fish, maybe mid-20s on the weight. Just a heck of a fish and a great day I spent with Dad. Now we ended up catching a lot of fish that way. Again, off the downriggers and with those flatfish, both long line on those flatfish behind the boat, 150 feet of line out way back there. And when you're fishing those flatfish, it's like, you'll see the rod tip like bend and then pop up. and then bend and then pop up. And that's when those lures hit the bottom, it almost kind of snags. And then that lure cuts free and flutters up in the water. So sometimes it can kind of be hard to tell when you actually get a bite because, it just like sticks and hangs. It's, it gets springtime like this. We started in snow, as you saw at the beginning of this podcast, as we're driving back home, and here now we're out of it. It's that time of year, and that's lake trout season, baby. I would much rather be on the lake today than working, but here we are. But anyways, there's 3 stories, 3 different ways that we've caught lake trout. I hope they kind of give you some tips and tricks and give you a little confidence to go out and try it yourself. I always joke, those darn lake trout, they're as moody as a teenage girl. Some days they just decide they're not going to bite, and there's nothing you can do about it. And other days, the light flips, and it's magical. And sometimes it's just kind of hard to know when those days are. So you just got to go. And I'm telling you, the guys that don't go on the bad weather days, you're missing out. Those are very often the days that the magic happens. Be safe, of course. No fish is worth risking your safety, but don't be afraid to go fish in a little weather. You can get a little wet. You can handle the wind for a couple hours. Give one of these tactics a try, and I sure hope to see you on the other end of one of those cheesy grinning pictures. That's all I got for today. I hope it helps. Get out there, go give it a whirl. You can't catch them from your couch, right? So take advantage of those liminal moments, and who knows? Maybe you'll be holding on to a state record. All right. We'll catch you on the next one.